Good morning, everyone. I want to thank everyone for joining us for our first Next Gen Committee webinar series. The first one is about the CCF Research Fellowship Program best practices for the LOI and full application, and from the reviewer standpoint. I'm going to hand it over to Nilo Azad and Kristen Spencer, who are going to be the moderators for this webinar. And then I also want to make sure everyone understands that we have Ben Stinger and Samara Elias as they're part of our review committee for the fellowship program. They're the chairs, so they'll be giving you guys some good information in terms of tips and best practices for doing your future opportunities with CCF. I'll hand it over to Nilo.
Well, good morning, or I don't know where everyone is coming from. So good afternoon if you're in some other time zones, and good evening. I think we could even have some potential good evenings today as well. So I'm Nilo Azad. I'm an investigator here at Johns Hopkins. I'm a little under the weather, so I apologize for the voice, and I'll try to keep my coughing to a minimum. We're really excited to see so many people here on this webinar. It's fantastic. And then Samara and Ben, who are also on this call, and Kristen Spencer, of course, who's my co-leader of this next gen group. Just a little bit of context. So, the CCF has been invested in the next generation of investigators in cholangiocarcinoma ever since its onset. It's been a major part of its mission. And to that end, we've been administering these fellowships, which have been growing each year. This year, in fact, we grew the amount of the fellowship per person as well. And these are really meant to allow fellows and early career faculty to have some protected funds to be able to advance research in the space of cholangiocarcinoma, because it can be difficult in a rare tumor to be able to get some of that initial seed funding. And what we have found is that many of the investigators that you likely know, that including people on this call, really got their start of their career from having that pilot funding that allowed them to then take an idea, a nugget, and move it forward and use it to compete for even larger amounts of funding. But like all granting mechanisms, there are some advantages that come when you are at an institution or with a mentor that has already done this before. And so what we want to do is make sure that we have opportunities for people everywhere that they train to teach each other, and for us to be able to provide you as much support as possible. And so for us, it's about learning about the different kinds of institutions that you all are coming from and the kind of work that you're doing, and how we can best support your application so you can really put your best foot forward, because that's such a huge part of academic success is grantsmanship and learning how to apply for grants. In our granting mechanism, the letter of intent, or LOI process, is the first step. And so Samara and Ben, who've really led this committee, are going to step in now and talk a little bit about both the process and kind of what we look for, just so that we can, when I was writing my first grants, my best mechanism was to actually take other successful grants and use that as my model. And so that's what we are hoping to do. And this should be very interactive. So you guys, if you have questions, or if anything looks unfamiliar or looks like something you'd like a little bit more granularity about. And I want to also emphasize, last thing, this is not just about this granting mechanism. You guys are going to be applying for all different kinds of grants, and the strategies that are necessary to really tell a robust story through science, through your science and other people's science, is a skill that's going to help you if you're applying for grant funding from the NCI, from your country's internal mechanisms, from the CCF, and even from the DoD if you're as hapless as me and keep applying for those grants. So, all right, Samara Ben, I'm gonna pass it over to you. Kristen, did you have anything you wanted to say in introduction?
Yeah, I would just briefly say good morning and thank you for joining. I'm Kristen Spencer. I'm also a clinical investigator at NYU. And I just wanted to mention Nilo gave a really wonderful introduction and overview of this session. This will be one of many that will, be different sessions addressing topics of interest that you all have brought up, areas where you want to hear more from senior mentors and folks about things like how to navigate international waters, how to network, how to work as a surgeon in the scientific field. And we plan to bring many more of these topics to you. So please stay tuned. And thank you again so much for joining.
Mary, you want to take it away?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. I echo what Nilo said. I'm so happy to see so many of you here with us this morning. My name is Mara Elias. I'm a physician scientist at the Mayo Clinic, and I co-chair the CCF Fellowship Program along with Ben Stanger. Ben, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yes, hi, I'm Ben Stanger, and I've nothing to add to what's already been said, but welcome everyone. It's great to see so many people.
Um, so as Nilo indicated, we want this to be very interactive. I do have a few slides just to sort of give an overview of um, what the intent of the fellowship program is, what CCF is looking for, and sort of strategies for best practices and things to consider from a reviewer perspective. And so, as I said, it's just very few slides because we do want the majority of this webinar to be interactive and to give you ample opportunity to ask any questions. So I'm just going to share my screen here. All right, can everyone see that? Okay, perfect. So best practices for LOI and application. The CCF Fellowship Program, just a brief overview, it was established in 2015, and the intent was to have a fellowship program that supports early career innovative researchers worldwide who are focused on studying cholangiocarcinoma, and the program intends to help these applicants, high quality researchers, to better understand the complexity of the disease and accelerate the pace of finding a cure. So that's sort of the overarching goal of this program. The primary and sort of the other things to keep in mind in terms of primary goals are to advance cholangiocarcinoma related science and to promote the career development of promising early stage cholangiocarcinoma researchers, right? To really identify the next generation of scientists and physician scientists who will work towards finding a cure for our patients. And so the deliverables include publications, any publications, but particularly high impact publications. And it's we really like it when the project serves as a catalyst to future funding, right? Whether that be a career development award from a foundation or an NIH career development award such as a KO8. And then ultimately, again, falling under the overarching goal, the foundation is really looking for research findings that can impact patient care, whether that be in the short term or the long term. So as Nilo indicated, the program has two components: the letter of intent component, followed by a full application. So generally, we receive about 60 to 70 LOIs from all over the world, and the format of the LOI is having a summary of the proposed research project, which is a one-page limit, applicant, NIH BioSketch, or any sort of it doesn't have to be NIH BioSketch particularly for international applicants, but BioSketch does sort of highlights all of their accomplishments and has a personal statement. mentor biosketch, and then a progress report for prior awardees only. So last year, I think was the first year, 2024, where we allowed prior applicants to apply for an additional year of funding. And so successful applicants, we are looking from the prior year, we're looking for a progress report to help us gauge what they've accomplished with their first year of funding, and because that helps us determine the likelihood of success in the second year. And then key components of the full application, similar to the LOI, there's a research strategy component. So this is longer. I think the page limit for this is 5 pages, whereas for the LOI, it's 1 page. And has aims and rationale, significance, scientific approach, preliminary data, and a statement of innovation. Other key components are the mentor, that should be applicant biosketch, mentor recommendation letter, and again, progress report for prior awardees. So that's just a brief overview of what the components are, and that will help sort of understand the tips for best practices. So each year, CCF identifies topics of interest, priority areas that the foundation would like to interest. So when you're applying for your whether it's your LOI or full application, ensure that you've identified an appropriate area that your research falls under, right? So for last year, these were the areas. And then adhere to the format that is outlined. It's very well outlined on the website, and it's important to adhere to it, right? Because there is a structure that we are looking for. And so sometimes I think, particularly for some applicants, when they hear the word letter, it ends up being an actual letter. And that's not what we're looking for. What we're looking for is a proposal, a brief proposal to give us an idea of what type of research you are planning to accomplish, what your aims are, what the scientific approach is. So these are very brief paragraphs, but it's important to pay attention to this format. And because these are the things that we are looking for when we are reviewing these LOIs. And then in terms of the full application, again, the format is similar to the LOI. So specific aims, rationale, scientific approach, significance, statement of innovation, but there's also preliminary data. And we do evaluate the preliminary data, and I'll go over that a little bit as well. In terms of the biosketch, so take this seriously as well. We do review the biosketches because there's 2 big components we are looking at as reviewers: the candidate and the science, right? Because this is what the goal of the fellowship program is, to advance cholangiocarcinoma science, but also to promote the career development of early stage investigators. So that biosketch is really important. That personal statement, ensure that it is tailored to the grant mechanism, right? That this is that you're applying for the CCF mechanism, mention something about what you are proposing, highlight your accomplishments, particularly if you have accomplishments in the field of cholangiocarcinoma research, any prior publications, awards, and other grants. So again, biosketch, it is really important. It is a component that we look at. And in that, the other aspect that we look for, and I think it's important to have it in there, are what are your plans, right? This is a grant mechanism for early stage investigators. So what are the plans for independence? Is this work that's really just going to support what the mentor is doing, or this is work that is going to serve as a catalyst for your own independent funding program? That's very important. So any plans that are, the career trajectory, right? Career development award applications, whether that's a KOA, foundation award, if you have those plans, it's important to just briefly mention those in your biosketch.
And I just wanted to mention on the topic of biosketches, because we were talking about not just this mechanism, but other mechanisms you apply for. I really do want to emphasize too how important it is to modify your biosketch based on the application. I can't tell you the number of times that it's very clear that paragraph of biography is just cut and paste or just the same as always. Or when you ask your collaborators to send you a biosketch and they send you one in 13 seconds and you're like, okay, they did not edit it. And so that the other thing I want to mention is you're going to get biosketches for your full application from your mentor and from other people that are going to be collaborators. They may or may not modify their biosketch, but you can edit their biosketch, and you have to let them know that you're doing it and get their approval. But sometimes that's an important part of your application, is to make sure even the other pieces from other people all match up nicely.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, because we've all seen it where it was clearly for another mechanism. And so the message that sort of sends is, the due diligence for this mechanism wasn't really done. And this is just a copy paste, across multiple awards. And then in terms of, so as I mentioned, candidate and science, those are the two big areas that we are evaluating when we review the applications. And so in terms of the candidate, really use the biosketch to your advantage. So from a reviewer perspective, what we're looking for is this a promising candidate with a track record of publications, particularly if they're CCA relevant publications. That's not an absolute requirement, but it's viewed favorably. Is there a trajectory towards independence, right? This is someone who clearly is on a path to independence, has plans for career development awards, other funding mechanisms. And what is the mentorship and environment? How committed is the applicant's mentor to their success and to their future independence? And whether the environment, along with the mentorship, is strong enough to ensure feasibility of the proposed research. And so that, for the full application, there is a letter of recommendation that is required from the mentor. So we do review that as well. And these are the components that we are looking for. And then what is the potential of the applicant to stay in the field of cholangiocarcinoma and make long-term contributions to cholangiocarcinoma science, right? Is this an individual that we think is going to be presenting at the CCF annual conference in 10 years, right? Because we're really trying to foster the next generation of cholangiocarcinoma researchers. The other component that we evaluate is the science, course, from a reviewer perspective. And when we're looking at the science, the criteria that comes to our mind are, first, is this exciting, innovative research that has strong translational potential, right? Whether that be innovative models or technologies, unique data sets that are being leveraged, and then having hypothesis-driven research, right? So not there's different types of research, but having a clear hypothesis and a well-outlined approach to address that hypothesis, that's really important. And then ultimately having research with translational potential, right? That can impact patient care either in the short term or the long term. For the full application, having robust preliminary data. That's important because that helps us understand whether what the feasibility of the proposed work is, right? This is somebody with experience and already has strong findings that support feasibility of the proposed research, that support the central hypothesis. Having a well-outlined approach that, in terms of models you'll be using, what mechanistic studies, outlining all of that nicely. If this is more of a discovery science proposal, or more translational or clinical proposals, making sure that there's an adequate statistical analysis, numbers, all of that is really important. And so again, for the approach, the key is having, all the necessary details that a reviewer would be looking for to ensure that this work is feasible. And the other thing that we look for is scope, right? Scope of the project, whether that is appropriate. Can this be accomplished within the given funding time frame and within the budget? So I think that is all I had in terms of slides, and just want to open this up for discussion and questions. So I'll stop sharing and open this up to all of you. Or Ben, if you have anything to add to that, of course.
I want to, take questions first, but I really want to emphasize, don't be shy. We're, not taking notes on who's saying what or anything like that. We're here to just help in a very open discussion, sort of say what our processes are.
Hi, I am Yashvir Singh. So it's a wonderful, I really liked, and kind of the it's going to helpful for me to submit proposal. So my question is, like, the first question is kind of like the first question is like the how much primary like results uh, that is important, like the how much should I pour the primary results information in the like LOI or in the proposal, like the like the technical wise or clinical knowledge, or like the how much should I pour that information, the first question. And the second question is like the in the applicant track record, like the like w- do you like the more focus with the clinical expertise or like a more technical expertise publication record? That's like the two things.
Shall I field that one, Samara? So, in terms of the type of application, I'll just point out that we accept applications that span from the very basic to clinical research, and all of those are acceptable, with maybe one exception, and I'll just put a little asterisk on that, which is if you're making a proposal that addresses a kind of a fundamental problem in science, but its relationship to cholangiocarcinoma is tangential. So sometimes we see applications where there's a kind of an interesting science being explored, but it could really apply to any cancer or infectious disease or whatever, and it's just being used to, squeeze into this grant mechanism. Those typically get a lower priority. But other than that, whether it's more clinical or more basic or more translational, that's really a matter for what your expertise is. And as long as it moves the field forward in some way that can legitimately be linked to progress in the field of cholangiocarcinoma, that's responsive and that is fine. So it really, you want to write the strongest grant. Don't try to shift the grant to be more translational, more clinical, more basic, depending on what you think we want. We want just good science. In terms of what to put forward technically, for everyone, I really would think about the two main review criteria, which are the quality of the science and the candidate, and your potential to have a long-term impact. So you want to present preliminary data, including data from prior publications that establish you as a competent researcher who has the potential to have a impact on the field in the future, and which shows the feasibility of your proposed experiments, so that you can do it, and that the experiments are actually feasible. I hope that helps.
Yep. Thank you.
Hi,
I wonder if
everyone. Thank you.
oh, go,
Oh,
go
no,
ahead,
go
go
ahead,
ahead.
please.
No,
Apologies.
please.
Okay. Sorry, just
Um,
two questions. One is, 4-page grant. So I know there's been some mention as to a biostatistical plan. Just curious, sort of how robust, how detailed of a biostats plan, and is that supposed to be kind of its own section or kind of interspersed within the aims? And then second question is, if the grant is involving investigational agent being obtained from some other source, a lab, a company, et cetera, kind of is a sort of support letter required, or is that just something that can be mentioned sort of in the body of the proposal? Thanks so much.
So I think, and I'll let Nilo add just from a clinical perspective as well. But I think for the biostatistical plan, it depends on it's not that we're looking for a separate section. It would be within your approach, right? And it depends upon the type of research. So for discovery science research, it could be very brief. If there's animals being used, just having some mention of how many you would be using in your paradigms, right? And justifying that briefly. But if it's more clinical research, translational research, where the numbers of patients and specimens that matters more, then I think it would be nice to have a well-outlined paragraph. It's not necessarily the extent or quantity, right? It's the quality. What's the information? Did you put all the relevant information in that paragraph? Nilo, anything to add to that in terms of biostats plan?
I mean, in a one-page LOI, it's very difficult to do that. So I think that everything Sumera says is correct and really like tailored more towards the full application. The one thing I do want to mention is that Ben mentioned we get a lot of different kinds of applications of all different kinds of research. And if you're going to be doing outcomes-based research or more epidemiologic like research, you still have to have tight science around it. And so I honestly think even in an LOI, it is useful. And one of the things I think ends up getting scored a little lower for those kinds of LOIs is when it's like we're going to look at our database of 5,000 patients and discretely just report some aspect of how patients do without a statistical plan, without clearly a conversation around, how are we controlling? What are we comparing to? And I think in your one-page LOI, for people who are doing those kinds of studies, some acknowledgement of coming up with a biostatistical plan is useful to elevate that LOI.
Thank you very much for the talk. I have a quick question that can I change my title in the full proposal? Like the first round, I have a title, and then in the second round, the full proposal, I found maybe writing in this way will be better. So can I change or add a little bit about the title at the second round?
I would say as long as the substance of the research is the same, yeah, changing the title a little bit is fine, but not to shift the focus of the research because any LOI that has been moved forward to a full proposal is based on the science proposed, so it really should adhere to that. But a title change is okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for this talk and for this presentation. I have a specific question about international applicants because I find it difficult sometimes to produce an NIH sketch. And in France and in some European countries, we don't have this culture of like really detailing this what it's not exactly how we present ourselves, and for us it's difficult to stick to this bio sketch and overall, do you have recommendations for non-US applicants to try to follow your recommendation the best? Thank you.
I'll take that one as well, and I understand that it is a challenge, but I think it is kind of the way that we as reviewers are used to looking at candidates and scientists, and to be able to do an apples to apples comparison where we're evaluating proposals in the same way. We kind of need it to be in the same format. I will say that if you go to the NIH website, and maybe we can share the link, there are detailed instructions. There are templates there. There are sample bio sketches that are there. So the template and the format shouldn't be that hard to download and to follow. But I think we do need to kind of stick to that format. Otherwise, it's just a little chaotic.
Thank you
I
very
I also want to say, Jeremy, that you're going to be, and everybody, that you're going to, the science is international now. And so over the course of your career, you're going to be applying for grants where biosketches are part of that. And so this is a pretty, you know, I was going to say not low maintenance, but this is a good place to practice it, And so this is a good place, and hopefully your mentors, depending on where your mentors are for, have had experience with submitting co-grants with other U.S. PIs, so they can give you some instruction. But we're also here. Like that's what we're here for. And we have examples we can give you, and you're always welcome to reach out to me or any of us. I'm throwing my other friends in the group too. But it's use again. This is a great time to use an example of someone else's biosketch and just see how people highlight what they've done. And as an early career person, your biosketch may not be as detailed because you're still building your portfolio, but it's going to still be a really useful exercise. So I would look at it as an opportunity to practice something in a lower stress situation.
Thank you.
I'm noticing in the chat that we didn't answer the question about collaborators and resource agreements. So it comes down to feasibility. I think if you are proposing something that requires a reagent, that could be a drug from a company, it could be a mouse strain that you haven't already worked with in your preliminary data. Yes, you need to be able to state that you have access to it. That could be in a letter of support, or it could just be stated in the application itself, as long as you are, really being honest, and I think we'll judge that based on the nature of what the resource is. If it is kind of a drug and sort of in the proprietary space, yeah, it's probably best to have a letter from the supplier, from the pharma or whatever, saying that you can have that. If it is something that is a little bit more obvious that you can obtain it commercially, or through a collaboration that you make very clear in your application, then that's probably okay as well. But yeah, it is important to not just say, yeah, we're going to get these mice or this whatever, and have the reviewer sort of say, well, I don't know that they're necessarily going to share that reagent.
And I think you were also wondering, Rohit, whether there was a place for it. So there is a place on Proposal Central. Somebody was wondering. Yeah, I think it was maybe you, Min. There is a place on Proposal Central to submit additional files. So these additional letters can be submitted under that.
All right, great. Thanks so much, everyone.
I see Ashray has a hand up.
Yeah, hi, thank you so much. Yeah, this is very, very helpful. I just wondered about whether this fellowship could be held with other grants. So, for example, covering a full-time salary plus some of the project expenses with, for example, another non-profit fellowship or fellowship from an organization like ESMO.
Maybe that's good for Ash and or Juan to speak to.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I think there isn't a problem with that, providing there is very clear delineation on what it is that CCF is funding. And just taking one step back, you'll know that most of these fellowships are funded by donors. And so we're accountable to the donors for the research. And obviously, the reason they have funded these fellowships are very specifically to advance the field of cholangiocarcinoma. What donors, I know from experience, don't like is that their grant just disappears into a sort of a bigger ecosystem, and they're not able to identify, what the contribution is that they've been able to fund. So it wouldn't be a deal breaker but I think it would need to be very clear in the application which elements are funded by the CCF fund and which are funded externally. Which just takes me to one other point I was going to pick up on was it's one thing applying for fellowships, which obviously this webinar is mainly about. But at the end of the fellowship, we also want to know, what the outcomes were. We'll have the end of grant reporting, and part of that is what we need to then feed back to our donors in terms of, this is what you funded, these were the outcomes, and so in that process, it's very important for us to be able to very specifically know what it is that donor fellowship was able to fund.
Yeah, thank you. That makes total sense.
Hi, my name is Stephen. Thanks for organizing this webinar. It's super helpful. My question is from the perspective of a basic scientist, and I'm wondering if the CCF has a preference for in vivo experiments. On the one hand, I can see the greater translational applicability of those experiments. On the other, I know the grant term is just a year with the possibility of an extension, so I wouldn't want to propose experiments that sort of exceed that timeline.
So go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Ben. I don't know if I would, I don't think there's necessarily a preference for in vivo experiments. You are correct in that, those, as compared to completely in vitro mechanistic studies, it may be easier as a reviewer to sort of glean the translational potential of those in vivo studies, right? And so I think that's one way this could an application that has, just completely mechanistic in vitro studies, those are valuable as well. But perhaps if another application has more clear translational relevance, it may get impacted that way, but we don't necessarily, I would say, and Ben, you can give us your opinion as well, but I don't think we necessarily would say that, you have to have in vivo studies if the impact of the work is obvious with the studies you've proposed, with the models you have, then I think you would have accomplished the purpose.
Yeah, again, it's about the best science, not about trying to fit it into, a mold. So something that investigates a very fundamental, you're asking from a basic science perspective, a fundamental aspect of cell biology, but the link to cholangiocarcinoma with some degree of specificity isn't clear, that's going to have a lower priority. But if it is a proposal that surrounds a mutation and vulnerabilities associated with a mutation that occurs in some, sizable fraction of cholangiocarcinoma patients, then that's great, because then, okay, we understand that vulnerability, there's a target, we can drug it, we can move the field forward in that way. If you are going to propose in vivo experiments, of course, there's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, it's a one-year grant. So probably best that the model that you're proposing is already established, that you have some preliminary data that you can show that in the span of a year, you can move that forward. I really want to emphasize that this grant mechanism is about leverage. It's about leveraging you to be able to get a grant from an organization that has deep pockets like the NIH or equivalent funding organization elsewhere in the world. And it's about leveraging you. It's the foundation leveraging you to become part of this community. So think about the experiments that you want to do. Yes, it should be within the scope of a one-year grant, but it is certainly not only a good idea, but probably a very good idea to include your future directions. How is this going to get you that next level of funding? So if you're on this border of like in vitro and vivo, maybe a good way to do it is I have the science I need to be able to propose some in vitro experiments, but I can easily see how my next step would be to take that in vivo and to, propose it that way. Because then that next in vivo experiment, once you have that model ready to go, sets you up for a more sizable grant.
Thanks both of you, very clarifying.
I just wanted to pick up a question on the chat to you guys. Could you share some suggestions about artificial intelligence oriented proposals? What are your thoughts on that? I see also there's AI note takers are saying we're quiet. We're not, so we can ignore those. I don't know who wants to tackle the AI question, Nilo.
I think you should definitely put things in. This is where a large part of where things are going. So absolutely.
I guess, I mean, this would be, I suppose, for a more clinically oriented grant, maybe we can have a little bit more color to the question. I would suppose, right, it's a tool. AI is a tool, just like, sequence analysis is a tool and things like that. So it needs to be used in an appropriate way. One of the things I'll say is we do our best across the spectrum of basic translational clinical to have the appropriate expertise on our review panel to be able to evaluate grants. If it's a heavy AI grant, I can't guarantee for any grant that we'll have the appropriate expertise. We do our best, but it's a small foundation. So that's maybe something to also keep in mind. Others may have things to add.
Yeah, just a comment to add to that, Ben. Just thank you for highlighting the reviewers. So just to quickly let everybody know, your applications are reviewed by a number of people, not just one individual. So there's usually I'm looking at Ash here, but it is usually around 4 or 5 reviewers for each of the applications. We also like to involve our patient research advocates. So there will be people who don't have a deep knowledge of the science necessarily, which is why it's important to have a good kind of lay summary, particularly for the full application. Ash.
Yeah, no, over the last 2 years, we've definitely increased the number of reviews being done for each LOI as well as the full application. On average, it's about 7 to 8 reviews, and that includes about 2 to 3 patient advocates as part of the review panel.
Yeah, I'll echo the same. I mean, clearly, as of today's challenges, I know nothing about technology, so I would certainly not want me reading these. But maybe this is something that we can take back for CCF, and we can look for some folks that have some expertise in AI that we could potentially collaborate with. Because I agree with Nilo. This is coming in hot and strong, and it's going to be the wave of the future. So really important point.
We do allow some leeway with our review process to be able to call in, have ad hoc reviewers as well. So we have a set panel, but depending upon what types of applications we receive, there is some flexibility there to specifically reach out to individuals, particularly those who've been involved with the foundation, to review a proposal.
But I do want to say, like 5 years ago, it felt like every single application had single cell RNA. Like we're going to do single cell RNA, and then like a year later, spatial transcriptomics, and maybe with no track record of having ever done it, right? Like we're going to do this, and so I think the same thing is true for like AI/machine learning. Like either you or your mentor needs to have some experience, or you have to have someone on your team. And you need to, like, even in the LOI, you should highlight that. Otherwise, like, oh, we're going to do machine learning on a bunch of path specimens and, like, great, but just make sure that you've already told us that you've got the expertise to do it, because it's not like you can just not plug and play.
On the other hand, not really the other hand, but it's a balancing act. You need to demonstrate your expertise. Some people in their LOI or in their full application demonstrate their expertise by presenting so much information and detailed information that is beyond the ability of the general reviewer to understand. So, I'm just thinking about some of the machine learning analytical types of proposals I've seen either for this foundation or elsewhere, where it's very hard to make heads or tails of what is really going on, what is being proposed. So you need to strike a balance between demonstrating feasibility and expertise, but also being able to describe what you want to do in terms that a general scientific reviewer can understand.
Hi, this is Davide Povero. I have a good question. I'm from the Mayo Clinic and just want to thank you all for organizing this meeting. My question is, what reviewers are looking for usually in year 2 applications? If it's actually is on the similar to what Dr. Elias outlined, or there is something else that we should emphasize in the proposal? Thank you.
I think the rationale for the year 2 was to basically further solidify the investment made in year 1, which is to say, these fellowships are to develop the careers of individuals who have a potential to impact the field, who are doing interesting science. And so someone who has taken that part way through a first year and that second year will really launch them, then that's the appropriate person to apply for that second year. So things have gone well. It really looks like additional funding would push them over the top to be able to get, say, their first R01 or some other level of funding that is appropriate. I would say proposals that for a second year that take a completely new direction of research are, in my view, I guess, this is the kind of thing we would discuss as a review committee and evaluate on a case-by-case basis. But in my view, that would be a somewhat lower priority. We're looking to have a continuation of a successful line of investigation that leads to a successful career.
Thank you, Ben. And just quickly to add to that, what we would be looking for, of course, we're giving some additional funding. So we wouldn't expect just to deliver late what was planned for year 1. We would be looking for a definite step up in terms of, additional year funding. We would then build on year 1 by doing this as additional deliverables. I think that's probably fairly obvious, but important to say.
There's a question in the chat about the timeline for submission to notification rejection, and I think Ash is probably on top of the dates for that.
Yeah, so for this year's cycle, the full applications are going to be actually due on January 3rd. And then reviewers will look at the full applications, and the decisions will be made sometime in March in terms of the final decisions, and then we will notify you at that time.
We have a few more minutes. Anyone with other questions?
Yeah. My name is John Weitz. I'm working out of the University of California, San Diego. Thanks for organizing this today. It's really helpful. I can speak for myself at least here, as I have a primary background in pancreatic and other GI cancers, and we're applying some of the technologies that we've developed to the field of cholangiocarcinoma. But I imagine that many of these applicants may share some of the same sentiments as cholangiocarcinoma as a rare disease. And of course, we can do a PubMed search and compile our own thoughts of the disease and what's missing in the field. But I guess this question is mainly more for future applicants and kind of help guiding in the future. But I was wondering if the foundation or any of the foundation associated labs have any plans to put out a review or perspective on really some of the focus points that, aside from what the foundation is hitting on, to really help orientate those from that have outside perspectives to really get started in a career in cholangiocarcinoma, and what are the biggest issues in the field to really help guide future applications.
Funny you should ask. Maybe Juan,
Yeah.
this is good for you.
Yeah, thank you, John. And I think this is something that we at the foundation have obviously, we've had offers of funding, and then the questions come. So what are you going to do with this funding? Where's the priority? So you are all invited to come to the annual conference in April in Salt Lake City. It's a conference, if you've never been, it's a conference with a difference in that patients attend as well as caregivers together with industry and scientists and healthcare professionals. So it really does bring everybody together. But we have a special theme this year. And the theme for the 2025 conference is reaching a consensus on research priorities. And the field of cholangiocarcinoma has been divided into 10 different working groups. So, basic science, translational science, surgery, systemic therapies, etc. So there's 10 different working groups, and each working group is currently being tasked with identifying what are the research priorities within that field. And so everybody will come back with 3 to 5 recommendations based on a literature review, so that we at the foundation will have a list of priority areas for research, which we can then build into our grant process. So it may be that we will then have a kind of more focused call, for example, on the fellowships. We'll have that sort of list of priorities will be available. But what it will also do is it will allow you as early career researchers to use that list, which has come through a consensus process, which will be published, and you will be able to then take that to other grant awarding bodies and make applications, and you'll be able to make a very good case for why whatever you're proposing is a research priority.
Great. Thank you so much. Much appreciated.
I think we probably have time for one more question, if anyone has any. Okay, if not, maybe Ben and Samara and Nilo, any last closing comments? No pressure. Juan, maybe?
Yeah, I have a final closing comment. So even before I came to the foundation, I was reviewing many grants, and I think the way I see the applications, and once I've read through the application, I take back a step and I ask myself, is this the right applicant with the right project in the right place, in the right institution, with the right facilities, with the right supervision, on the right path? And I think this speaks to many of the comments that Sumera made, because taking that step back, is this really somebody who we are going to be able to take through cholangiocarcinoma research, hopefully build a career, go on to further grants, as Ben said, leverage it. And we want to see that sense of direction. So make sure that your LOI or your full application is able to tell that story, because that's what we're looking for.
I think that summed it up very well. I don't know if anyone else had anything additional they wanted to ask, anything operationally you wanted to share?
I was just going to say, I think everybody should see the QR code. I would encourage everybody to join the ICRN and get on our mailing list. That way you'll get to hear about additional webinars that the Next Gen Committee will be hosting in the next year. So to get on that, you'll also get information about future funding opportunities and any other opportunities that where you guys could get engaged. Don't feel like, just because you're a junior investigator that you can't join the ICRN. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, and it's a good way for you to interact with a lot of our senior investigators and key opinion leaders, and then get involved in some of the projects that we're working on so that you get some experience in networking through that process. So I encourage you guys to join, and then if there's any additional questions after the webinar, feel free to email us at research@cholangiocarcinoma.org.
Thank you, Ash. And on behalf of the whole foundation, I'd like to thank you all for committing to research, or at least considering research in cholangiocarcinoma. It's much needed for our community. And on behalf of all of us here, wishing you all the very best for the Christmas and whatever other holidays you celebrate. And we look forward to working with you in the new year. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much for joining us, everyone.